last week. Small updates on RC2 communications, small updates about the workshops. No demos, but just an update on YesSql and Fluid this week. Demos. Demos. Who do we have to make demos? Jean and Antoine to make demo, and anyone else who wants to make demo.
Have you got a demo today, Antoine?
Yes, I can.
Yes, I knew he would say yes. A demo about yes. I knew it. I should have written it before.
Awesome.
And Dean?
No, I'm too lazy.
What? No. Anyone else? If we have time, I can just talk about again. And it's not even.
Your volume was quite quiet, Sebastian.
Yeah, let me see if, because my other set died. For 10 minutes. Try. Issue is that if it fails again, it might be musty. 1 second, setting up.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, I don't know how long it will last. So, more people joined, and what was I saying? Topics, then updates, Portrait 1. Portrait 1, I'm not sure we merged anything, but there was some activity this week, and so we'll triage on Thursday, so nothing new here. Portrait core. There has been some activity. So last week we stopped there. This week, use ShapeFactory as binding. Use ShapeFactory as binding. I think we talked about it. Maybe not. So this one is about exposing the ShapeFactory property in the shape provider classes, like the shapes that can be created by methods. Okay, ShapeFactory. So if you have a ShapeFactory property, it will resolve the iShapeFactory and give it to you instead of using the new property or having to resolve it by yourself. Just a convention. Agentiary fixes, script style tag helpers, asp-name attribute. Okay. Tag helpers fixed. Okay. Contributor, hide set settings to disable dynamic. That could be a demo. What, Dean?
I forgot about that. We could demo that.
everything. Okay, so we'll see what it is. Queries doc fix. Okay. Fix Vue.Draggable element prop deprecated. Okay. Upgrade agency theme and the blog theme. So new updates on these themes. So this has been moved. And these are new, not moved. That's interesting. Is that an issue? Or maybe the name has changed. Why are there just new?
Folder, I guess the folder has changed.
But they should be marked as, if it was just a folder, they would be marked as renamed in Git.
Mm-hmm.
And here I see the new files, but I don't see the old ones removed. Well, this one is marked as removed, but this one is marked as added, as moved, and this one is marked as added, so I don't know. Deprecated src assets image portfolio, and this one is the root dist assets image portfolio. You see there is src and dist, so you add, so one of them is extraneous, so one of them should be removed.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise they will be also in the package for nothing. So there is too many files here, and check the recipe that's pointing to the correct one, the one that is included, not removed. So this one, change. Okay, good. Coming soon, also updated. Change. You see this one here, this seems weird because there are too many things deleted or added, and not much changed or moved, because most should have been changed or moved. Extensible filters for content admin list refactor. This has been merged. We've seen a demo a few weeks ago. So the idea is that now we can extend what filters are available in the contents admin list. And there are more things already available, and each module can provide their own filters drop down. So then fix pod service registration in contents admin controller related to the PR. Tab card and colon placement docs, so updates on the documentation to define the custom groups and cards. Fix example in scripting documentation. Okay. It doesn't work. Surprised. With my console. Doesn't work. Interesting. Okay. New contributor. Remove build agency for gulp. But why agency and not blog theme and coming soon?
Because the other ones still have a gulp.js file, but the agency not anymore.
Okay.
And we are using the styles.js and styles.css. We just copy it and use them.
Okay. Demo videos in iframe directly in the doc. Okay. The nice demo videos that Lombik is doing and Dean is usually giving. Job. Shortcodes refactor has been merged, so all the naming convention and the way shortcodes can be added dynamically. Well, dynamically, sorry, statically by code, but for each module. Rework query filter to include list options model. Query filter.
I made a mistake in the first PR, which related to the admin menu and how it dealt with content types. So it's just reworking that a little bit.
Seems wrong. It's in the core library instead of the abstraction, and it's an interface like iContents admin list filter that maybe I would want to resolve.
Yeah, we don't actually have an abstractions library for the contents module. We just have a core module. We don't have a lot of abstraction libraries for most of the modules. Some of them do.
Yeah, I mean, anything that needs to be, if there is no extensibility point in a module, then usually you don't have an abstraction. But this one, maybe should deserve an abstractions one.
Yeah, I wondered about it because there's that one there, but also I needed to put the view model up into a project. So, would a view model belong in an abstractions?
Well,
because it's referencing MVC type stuff.
In this case, you need it. So maybe it's not a view model directly, but call it a DTO or context object. And then you can create a view model in the module itself that will match that. But you need an object to pass some properties. So definitely should be in an abstraction thing. Core is a way to do that, but yeah, it definitely should be in abstractions. If we had an abstractions.
Yeah, I'm always wary of creating too many extra projects. Previously, this was all just in the contents module, and I think the lists module took a reference on it to get access to this stuff, which is.
But now it's extensible. So core is okay-ish. Abstraction is better for these kind of things. There is the content permissions that is in core because it's not an abstraction. It's a component that we want to depend on, but we don't want to depend on the module. And well, just nice to have if you make it. Update docs to include shape.Named example. Okay, the new thing. It's not a new thing, it's just, is it? Yeah, this is the new thing, right? Is it related to differentiator?
I was just found myself trying to find a shape that had a dash in it. I couldn't remember what the method we had was called, and looked it up and realized it wasn't in the docs. So it's been there for a long time. It's just if you have a dash or an underscore, then you can't use the naming convention above.
The new one. And this one, test one, media library table view new column, last modified date and time. So there was a PR from, we don't know, PM. I'm sure we know his name. Don't remember. To add more columns, so you can sort by last modified date time in the media items. And that's it. Cool. Question from Shen. Are there any plans to improve documentation? My job has tasked me with learning CMS and design. Worst nightmare. No offense, love the product. So if you think that the documentation is your worst nightmare, I assume you have never worked with Orchard 1, because I think the documentation is much better than Orchard 1.
Yeah. He left the conversation, but he asked the same question on the Orchard Core Facebook user group this weekend. Okay, so, but he joined and he asked the question and he left. Okay.
That's okay. So maybe you should find issue with suggestion about how to improve it. So yes, we're always improving documentation. If there is anything specific that you would like to see, you can find an issue, and maybe someone will take that over. Or if you want to help and improve that, well, that will be hard if you don't know anything about it, but at least piece by piece, learning something, asking questions, and writing what you've learned as a documentation will be great. So at first, find issue with what you think is missing, and that we should focus on, because we usually try to fill any gap. Good. Then pause. We're starting. Antoine, alphabetical order.
Yeah. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
So the demo is about deployment step, about the missing ones. So we opened an issue about all the steps that were missing. So this kind of settings, you cannot currently export them with a deployment plan. And we discussed about it during the last triage, and Dean and I made a pull request implementing generic site settings deployment step. So we added a new project called orchardcore.settings.core. Inside, we added a generic class called site settings property deployment step. We also added a deployment source and a deployment step driver. So thanks to this, we are able to call to reference the project in another module, for example in orchardcore.admin, which has some admin settings. In the startup, you specify that you require orchard.core.deployment, and you can add a deployment source of admin settings. You can add a deployment step driver of admin settings whose title and descriptions are admin settings and description is export the admin settings, and a deployment step factory of admin settings. We used it in different modules and features like the admin, the user, the orchard.users module has multiple features like and settings like login settings, registration, reset password, and change email. So we implemented it in modules having settings that don't have secrets. So when you use the code in the startup, you can then declare a new deployment plan and use the new step. For example, the admin settings. And here you can find the title and the description you specified in the startup. So that's an easy way and generic way to implement a deployment plan for your settings in your module.
Thank you. Can you show back the code of the startup? That was the last line I wanted to understand.
Yes.
So this add singleton service is a deployment step factory. This is the, so you need a deployment source and a deployment step factory, right? Okay, and then a deployment step. So what's the difference? I made it, I don't remember. Deployment source is to
export the settings.
Okay, and deployment step factory.
It will allow you to be.
Oh, this is the UI stuff. The description of the step to declare that there is something that you can export, and the other one is just handling that in the recipe. Okay.
Yeah, that's what we are using the name to generate a unique key based on the name.
And go back. So there is only one. So if you go back to the code in a startup. Okay. There is one thing here that is not generic, is the localizer. And because, so here we have a localizer that is resolved because we want to be able to localize the names that we generate in the UI. And to that, you need to resolve the localizer from the class that contains the strings. Otherwise, the PO extractor won't be able to find the correct strings.
Yes.
Ideally, instead of these 4 or the 3 calls to services dot, so the from line 94 to 100, we should have one call that is like services dot register custom settings, and you pass admin settings.
Yes.
You can't.
Dim tried to do an extension method, but didn't manage to do it.
So the extension method's no problem, but the PO extractor won't find the localized settings because it looks for a variable named S and then starts.
Yes.
I think that's how it works. So it would be nice to find a way around this, because one of the uses of this feature is to enable users to really easily add deployment steps to their own site settings, not just our ones. But that was the problem with just having a simple extension method.
Yes. So at first I was thinking we could pass also the deployment startup class index is an extension method, so you pass two classes, but you will now I see that there is still the S variable name. That would be an issue because you can't then just pass the strings. You still need to pass the S. Another way would be to cheat and to pass a lambda that will return the strings. That's a way to do that, maybe.
Yeah, I looked at the lambda. I don't know the extractor that well though, but from what I understood, the lambda looks for a variable named S, not a func. So even passing the middle lambda.
Variable name is, what do you mean? I mean, if you pass a lambda, if the convention is S equal angle bracket uppercase, that should.
Yeah, like I said, I don't know the extractor well enough to understand what it's searching for, but I remember a PR from Hisham recently where it looks for property names. Like,
I know. We need a new, we need to update the extractor. We need a way to declaratively define a string when it's not foundable by code. Like we would just pass the string admin settings and export the admin settings here, but we would add an attribute maybe on the startup, on the deployment startup class that will say custom localization string and the string for the two of them. This way the PR extractor will also find that and say, oh, there is a string like this in this class. That could be a way.
yeah, or even possibly being able to put that attribute on like an admin settings class and put the strings somewhere there as statics or something in some way.
Yeah, so the convention will then be that the string will be found. Well, what I was saying on the startup class is because the string itself will be in this file. So when you want to know which PO file you want to look at, usually we look at the file where the string is. And in this case, the extension method call will be in this config services on the deployment startup class. That's why it will be interesting to have the attributes on the deployment startup class.
Yeah, I get what you're saying there. That makes sense.
Just
and
to be able to find the string in which PO file. So
yeah.
Okay, interesting. So don't change anything. That's fine because there is no solution. But that will be good to be able to define startup. Well, to define PO extractor attributes to find strings by attributes. Interesting. Okay, we'll have to find an issue. Good. Thank you, Antoine. The idea is that I think Zoltan made a PR that will expose all the settings like this, and there were two issues with that. Is first that settings with secrets will be exported also.
Mm-hmm.
And Zoltan wanted to be able to reuse some logic without having to code a custom export step for each setting. So we suggested that we should have instead an opt-in way of doing the thing. So we provide the automatic way of creating the settings, exporting the settings, but you have to opt in from your module. So you don't have to write any code, but just say, okay, my custom settings has to be exportable automatically with a custom step. And that's what you need. Good job. Thank you.
Yeah, and the next step will be to implement, as you said, the settings that have a secret.
Well, the next step, not the next things to do are to implement exports for this custom or custom deployment source for these settings and not rely on the generic one because the generic one will be too generic for that.
In another PR, yeah. Based on what Dean made for the SimTP one.
Yes. But we need to talk. Tomorrow morning, Dean. Good?
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, we should talk about that. I'd like to simplify it a little bit better.
Okay, thank you, Antoine. Next is by alphabetical order, Dean.
Okay, I'll share my screen. Let me know when you can see a screen.
We can see it even better than Antoine's.
Excellent. Is it big enough?
Yes, it's big.
Great. So I've been doing a little bit of work with the dynamic cache module recently on a site that I'm working on, and one of the things that I experienced was that I was working a lot of menu shapes which were being cached, and I couldn't edit my templates because the items were cached. So we talked about adding a new setting so that we could either turn the cache on or turn the cache off, or so that you could uncache your objects. So in the configuration menu under settings, we've added it here as part of the standard site settings. So you have the normal site settings, the resource settings for all your scripts, and then a cache setting. And the settings here are very similar to the resource settings. The default is that the cache will be enabled in production or disabled otherwise. Then you can just turn it on to enabled all the time, or you can specifically disable it. Or, and this one's actually really been quite useful because I've been doing a lot of work with the caching, and it's been really helpful to see what's in the cache and what cache blocks I'm using are working. So you can turn it on and have a cache debug mode. Now, what that will give you is when you look at your blog, and then you go and look at the source of it, everywhere there's a cache block, you'll get a little bit of information telling you about the cache block, which cache ID it's using, the dependencies that it's using, how long it's cached for, any of the variations that are present, and then it will show you all of the stuff that's in the cache and the end of the block. So if you're starting to work with a lot of dynamic cache options, that can be just really useful to see what's going on and whether your cache blocks are working correctly and whether they're adding the correct dependencies later on. So nice simple setting. If we turn it back off again, actually I'll disable it. I'll turn on the mini profiler for a second, because this is how I've been kind of evaluating whether it's working for me. I don't know if everybody knows the mini profiler feature particularly, but you get a profile of what happens during your page loads. And what's useful here is we can see the SQL calls that are being made. So here we've got a list call, and here let's look down a little bit further, there's going to be a menu. There you go, there's a menu call, which was the one that we cached. So as we refresh that page with the cache disabled, we're going to see that the menu is constantly being retrieved from the database. But if we go back into here and turn the cache on specifically and reload this page, I'm reloading it a couple of times because every time you change your site settings, you reset the site. What we're going to see is that the menu item is no longer being retrieved from the database in order to render this page.
You made a mistake. Not the menu item, the menu.
Oh, the menu, the main menu, in fact.
Very important, because in Orchard 1, it will load the menu items one by one. They are different content items. Here, the menu is a content item, and the menu items are contained by this main menu item. So it's a single query.
So it's a single query, but it's also a single query that's now not happening, which is good. And if I was to go back in and edit the menu, then it would clear the cache automatically, because the cache has a dependency on this alias, and then it would refresh it from the database and keep it in the cache for 5 minutes.
What's the scope of the setting? Because there are lots of caches. There is the dynamic cache module, which will work with shapes, but it also uses services that are available as liquid tags and tag helpers to cache custom sections, which are part of Orchard Core, not the ASP.NET stack. So I assume these settings apply to the cache services in general and not just the shape cache.
Yeah, correct. I'm just looking to see if I can. So this is the liquid cache statement, which looks at the cache options. There's also the this one here is probably the that pops the cache debug mode in, and it's also there on the dynamic tag helper, the dynamic cache tag helper, the Razor one, and I think here, just in the service itself for the dynamic cache, I'm able to actually disable it, so just return null when it tries to get a cached value. So it impacts on as far as I know, all of the cache places that we're using. If that makes sense.
Yes, I wonder if people will think that it also works for the ASP.NET cache, which it doesn't.
No, and there's an issue open about that. I'll talk about it at triage next time we get to it, because that's working. It's fighting with the current tag helper. Because they both named the same, so they both get triggered. So one of the
what is named the same? What and what?
So the dynamic cache tag helper, if you're working with it in Razor, it's called cache, and so is the other one that you wrote for the ASP.NET.
That's weird.
So what happens is when you go kind of down here in your scope, and you process the content, when it actually calls and process content, if it didn't find it in the cache, get child content, that calls down into the MVC tag helper. It renders the cache, puts it in its own memory cache, and then returns it up here. So it actually stays in cache. So it's actually cached twice.
Yeah, because there is a name conflict.
Because there is a name conflict.
That's weird. Why did we use this name? That's weird. We have to look at the history, because when I wrote this tag helper, I must have known there was another cache. Oh, I know. There is a conflict only if you include the tag helpers, the two assemblies for the tag helpers. I see. Well,
yeah, so the trick is to actually remove the, so if we go to somewhere in one of the themes.
In the Vue component, in the Vue imports, probably. So maybe
so if we go here, so by default we add these. So the fix is to go remove tag helper.
I didn't even know you could do that.
Oh, neither did I. hashtag helpers dot cache or something along those lines.
Okay, the issue is that we should not have a conflict in the name. We should not have named that cache then. We should have called it something else.
Yeah, I would call it dynamic dash cache because it's from the dynamic cache module, but you know, that would clear up any ambiguity.
Yeah, that's bad.
And it's one of those things that you don't know until you get it in the debugger and you actually look at it and you realize that both memory caches are being filled.
Okay.
But anyway, back to the settings, which are great. I think they cover everything. And it should be really useful if you're starting to use cache blocks, which I've been doing a lot this last week, and they're really impressive.
What, sorry, I didn't get what you said. What?
Sorry,
you work on?
I've just been doing a lot of work this last week on a site I'm building with cache blocks.
Cache blocks. Okay.
Yeah, cache blocks. And they are very good.
The dynamic cache blocks or the asp-name cache blocks?
The dynamic cache blocks.
Yeah, you bet they are good.
They're great.
I think that's a great way to use the decouple mode and use the cache blocks, cache tag helpers, liquid cache, just to have fast sites. And I would love to see more usage of that, like decouple site and cache blocks. And because in the cache blocks you can put your local queries, they won't be run because they're cached. A super nice way to do that.
Yeah, so that's actually exactly what I've been doing this past week is making queries, making SQL queries, putting them in cache blocks, adding the dependencies the first time the query runs, and then testing whether or not I can update content and have the cache clear automatically. And I'm really impressed. It's great.
When you say SQL queries, you don't mean actual SQL queries directly. You mean like content queries or predefined SQL queries?
Yeah, predefined SQL queries. So these kind of SQL queries.
Okay. Named SQL queries. Okay. And
managed
even though you could have inline SQL queries inside your Razor view, or call generic content queries based on whatever tags, content types, using the helpers. Okay, but here you administrate your SQL queries in this feature in the admin. Okay.
Yeah, to be honest, I have done a bit of both direct session queries, but for me the SQL queries are proving more powerful because I can just be a little bit more specific about what I need, and cross-reference against taxonomies a little better.
Okay.
The site will be done in a couple of months, so hopefully I can give another bit of how we are using it.
Must be a big site, couple of months.
Oh, it's not a little one. It keeps me busy.
Good for you. Okay, thank you. Very nice. So we did that model for resources like scripts, CSS, minified resources. Do we want minified versions of the scripts on production and development? Always. We did that for caching now. Where could it be applied? And I have the third question after that. Where could we apply that model? I think that's it. But yeah, that's a good pattern to reuse, to be able to choose when we want to enable a behavior based on its production, its development, always, never, more than just enabling the feature. Okay? Because sometimes just enabling the feature is not what you want in terms of permissions or atomicity. I have another question, which is how do you purge the cache? Do you have to disable it? Can't you just say purge, keep it, but purge now?
Well, I actually put a little hint in here when I first wrote this PR and said, if you want to purge your case, just click save, because it reloads the tenant every time and the cache services are scoped inside the tenant.
That's wrong. That's wrong because if you use the Redis cache implementation, it won't restart. It won't clear that.
And that's why I removed the hint.
Okay, so we can't right now. We can't say purge the cache, but yeah, there is no purge the cache.
There is no purge the cache. But
I'm not even sure it will be doable because it will mean that the services, the dynamic cache service needs to record every entry. It might not be available. So the services in ASP.NET Core or the interfaces we provide don't support that. It's based on each implementation and that there is no common interface for that. Meaning in Redis, if you used a name database in Redis, you could do that. But the interface doesn't expose the fact that you have a name database because it's very specific. So I'm not sure you can actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would have to be something that was just supported by the Redis option, so we could have an interface.
The only way would be to have a prefix on the keys that can be changed dynamically, like the same way you restarted the tenant. Maybe the tenant could have a run ID, a version, or run version, a GUID when it started, and we could use that as a prefix so that if you restart the tenant, it will use completely new keys. And this is, by the way, how we handle in dynamic cache. We handle the entries. They are all based on names. So if you don't use the same name all the time, then it will expire eventually.
Yeah, so that could work. Prefixing based on the.
Yeah, but I don't think we should do that. I think we should keep it this way. And if you use Redis, then go flush your Redis cache.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much. Any questions, other topics, or I will talk about a little change I made in YesSql this weekend. So, sharing my screen because we have nothing more important to talk about. Was there someone who found an issue and these kind of issues, I'm like, nope, you're wrong. And then I'm thinking and I'm like, okay, I think I understand what you mean now. And I asked them to create a pull request to show the issue. And the issue is about concurrency. So recently we introduced concurrency in let me go in the closed PRs because that's what I want to show you. This one. So recently I will show you their PR. So we introduced the notion of concurrency in YesSql. So when you call save, you can say check for concurrency true. What it will do is when a document is updated in database, it will do optimistic concurrency, which relies on doing a where clause in SQL, and it takes the value of a property of the document and it updates the same document with a where value equals all value. So if you update the document and this field was not the same as before when you loaded the document, then the update statement will update 0 record. And when you get that, you know that the save call was done on a document that was modified by another transaction in the meantime. And then it throws a concurrency exception if you said check for concurrency. I think I will just mute Dean. It's not that loud, but I can hear him for his privacy. And then and that's how it handles concurrency. So when this user said, "Oh, it doesn't work for my scenario," I'm like, well, this is optimistic concurrency, and you want optimistic concurrency, so it works. I mean, we have unit tests and everything. But he made a good case, and the scenario he's doing is loading a document and rendering it on a page as a form. Okay, so let's say a user, and you see the username, and you can edit the username. Okay, and so you edit the username, and then you submit the change. And what in the way that YesSql was working is that on the post of this form, you would load the document, then update the document and save the document in the same transaction. And this goes very quick, like load the document, update, save. And this document, the one you've loaded, it has loaded a version that might have changed since you rendered the form. So in this case, it's optimistic concurrency, but with yourself, not with a long-running edit. So what I had to change is that now you can set the version property if you want. So in this case, let me show you the test. 1 second, kids are too loud. Done. I shouted, so I'm muted. So the idea is, where is the unit test? Here. This unit test should set version property, not this one. Should check version exchange. So this unit test, now, imagine I load the document, it's a person, then you create a view model. Okay, and what you will do is that when you edit the form, you will store the version of the entity that you are editing, such that when you post the value, so in the meantime, someone has changed the object, then you post your value, but when you post, you also post the version of the document that you were editing, such that when you then save it, so like here, create session, yes, so here after the form is posted, then you just say, here is the version of the person I was editing. Okay, no, this is not here. This is, at some point, I should have assigned the version. Maybe it's this unit test. Yes, here. Where is that? Here. You assign the version to the document that you have edited, and then you save again. So the main change is that now the version property, if you have a version property on your document, you will be able to set it before saving the document. To say which version of the document you were updating, and then you will get a concurrency exception. Okay, before you could not set it, so it will just use the one that is just loaded, and you might not have seen some concurrency exception. And we can even use it in Orchard this way, because let's say you are editing a page, okay, and we then save the page. As of right now, if we enable the concurrency check, which we don't, it will just update the last change. So you will not see any concurrency issue. But with that thing now, what we can say is that when we create the form for the content item, we can also store the version property of the content item, such that when we click save or publish, if someone else has changed the same content item, we could catch a concurrency exception in this case. And then we could just say, okay, there was an issue, someone changed the thing, force it, or reload the item, or open a new page to see what's the value, or even show the current values if you want. So we could use that option to detect concurrency between two editors at the same time, which I think could be a very nice way to do that. So that's the change. Now, if you have a version property on your document, the same way if you have an ID property on your document, you can read the ID. If you have a version property on your document, you can read the version or even set it before you save it. So that's the change I made on YesSql. Questions? No question. That's good.
No, that's good. You merged the other one with the collections as well, did you?
I merged it because I didn't have any feedback from Sergio. All the tests are passing, and even more. So that's good. We can use collections also. Yeah, and we might even think about, do we want to put some things in collections, like the users, like the front-end users, like we mentioned, that would be good for. We might start thinking about it, or even if someone wants to use specific collections for specific documents, like I don't know, we might have some like settings, site settings, or just content items. We might have a collection just for content items. Whatever, we might think about it. It will be breaking, but we don't want to do that for content items. But if we have new entities that come in, we might want to think about it.
Yeah, I know Sergio want to start putting tokens in there.
Yeah, and
which makes sense actually. It's
yeah, Kevin push for that also. Bertrand one by one want to put his products inside a custom collection. Maybe why not? Then another topic, we need to update Fluid. Antoine, if you have some time, update the Fluid version because someone filed an issue saying something wasn't working, like the divide by, the floats are not correctly handled. And it's actually a fix that I made in Fluid a few weeks ago already. We are just late on the version. So we should update the references. Probably with YesSql also then. But I haven't pushed and mastered this thing for YesSql. Oh, crap. I need to do it. That's it. And Dean, the shortcodes module, where is that? The admin shortcodes?
Well, I just merged the refactor, so, you know, give me a week or two.
Okay.
No, it is coming along. I would hope to have a demo on that next week. It's
you have
cool.
started something?
Yeah, no, I've started something.
Okay, good. Thank you. Beautiful. Ideally, if we could just put an attribute on the text box, for instance, and then the script will just create the button, you know, or even if it's not as automatic, but an easy way to change a text box into a short-coded text box, so it can have a pop-up with the shortcuts available, like in Orchard tokens. That would be great.
Yeah, I was kind of, yeah, no, I do. I was kind of thinking modals because I've been thinking more of HTML editors. The other thing that I need to talk about with you as well is context, because there's no context at the moment from where. So if you're editing a content item or editing an HTML body part, I can't pass the context into the shortcode processor at the moment.
But do you need a context for a shortcode?
Well, if we're making them like tokens, then maybe we do, because tokens had good context.
Example, what do we want?
So JP had a good example he asked me about last week, where he's trying to do a localization code for his editors, where he can type the localization and a key and look up from the content item itself from another part some fields that have been edited with different localization strings. So that would work, but it needs a context.
Okay, I think about it, at least for resolving services, maybe. Okay.
Yeah, I looked at static as well, and there's a context there. I think it's probably relevant, but I couldn't find a huge amount of use cases for it yet.
I will also look at the GraphQL model, how they do that. You can pass a custom object as a context. You will have to cast it to the one you know it is, but we can have an object context and available and per request set it. Yeah, so
yeah, I was thinking something simple like an object context would be enough.
Yeah, okay, good. We'll talk about it. Thank you, and thanks everyone for joining. See you on Thursday for a triage, or next Tuesday. Next Tuesday is the 14th of July. It's our national day for Antoine. Not much Bertrand now. Bertrand has 2 national days now, and myself. So let's see you on Thursday or next Tuesday. Have a good week. Bye-bye.